white Jesus is everywhere. And
Everywhere.
so I guess really the first question is, how did we get here? How did we go
Mhm.
from our place of worship being a sacred space for us to commune with each other and commune with God to it being a launching pad into
Yeah.
the atmosphere of entrepreneurship or political influence? Like, how did we as a people get here?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The probably the low hanging fruit of that is the prosperity gospel, which came up in the 80s and 90s, right? Where it was this idea that that you could connect your salvation to how financially prosperous you were, right? So the richer that you were, the more likely that God was favored for, like had favor upon you, etc. So I think that's kind of like the most simple way to think about like how we got to this particular part. But the other thing too is that um, I think we shifted, and I mean we've seen this kind of like in our traditional political climate too, right? Where like the focus of actually a care about the people or pretending to even care about the people, because we can get into that for a whole nother conversation. But I think we've stopped pretending that the church is not a business, and now we are really getting into, okay, it's functioning exactly like, you know, a Fortune 500 or whatever. The only difference is the tax law looks different for a nonprofit or a service organization than it does for, you know, Capital One credit card, you know, company. So we have started to develop this like or adopt this colorblind perspective. Like God doesn't necessarily care about race, gender,
I'm a
sexuality, and
Christian
all those
first.
pieces.
That's what they
Right.
say. I'm a Christian first.
Exactly. Exactly. And so we should be focused on heaven, not necessarily on our earthly identities. And what's so interesting is that there's so many scriptures that talk about you formed me in my mother's womb and my innermost parts. And so like God knows all the hairs on your head, like all of this intentionality in who we were actually created to be. And yet we're not supposed to pay attention to race, gender, sexuality, able, like we're not supposed to look at in any of this. It's just very contradictory how we've spent so much time trying to act as if these things don't matter because they're quote unquote not going to matter in the afterlife. And it's like that don't make sense.